To wrap up the fair housing laws, we need to talk about advertising and the HUD logo, things of that nature. And if you're not familiar with the HUD logo, there's a picture of it there in your book, in your text. But it's if you've ever seen, like, it's like a little house with the verbiage underneath it, letting us know we do not discriminate. Y'all, that's y'all, that's the HUD logo. And y'all, it says it's highly recommended to use the logo in all your marketing and advertising. Um, y'all, are you legally required by law to put the HUD logo in all your marketing and advertising? Y'all, there's not a federal law that requires it. Now, depending on your state, you may have a state law that requires it, but there's no law that requires it. However, y'all, HUD, in their guidelines, they suggest and highly recommend you have it. Now, why does that matter? It matters a lot, so we need to talk about that. So, y'all, first of all, what are we talking about marketing and advertising? Where does this logo have to be? Y'all, if you're doing a brochure or business cards, for sale signs, anything that would be considered real estate related with your name on it, you should probably have that HUD logo that indicates or suggests that you do not discriminate in the practice of real estate. Now, again, as I said, it's not a legal requirement at the federal level, but it is in the HUD guidelines that you should. They highly recommend you have it. If you do not have it, and somebody files a fair housing complaint against you, then HUD says that will be considered de facto evidence. It will be used against you in court. The fact that you do not advertise, we don't discriminate, then we must assume you do. That's how it's going to be used against you. So, you need to have it in all your marketing and advertising. Now, when you put that on your say a business card, you can't just stick it on there, and maybe put it so small that you can't really even tell what it is. There are some requirements to advertise with the logo. Now, HUD does not say how big or small it has to be, but what HUD does say, it must be of at least equal size of any other logos you may have. If you have a realtor logo or an MLS logo or any other kind of logo you may have in that advertising, business card, whatever, then the fair housing logo must be of at least equal size. It cannot be smaller than the other sized logos. And then it also says, maybe if you are crunched for space and you can't get all the logos you want in the area that you need to put it, HUD does say you could just use the words without the house itself, but you cannot use the house without the words. So you can put the words that you see in the logo there and not have the house, and that'll be okay. But you better not have just the house without the words. That would not be okay. That would be a problem. So that's what you need to understand about that HUD logo. Okay. HUD gives some advice to prevent any other violations when advertising. And y'all says HUD recommends a variety of human models from minority and majority groups of varying ages to assure compliance with advertising guidelines. In other words, first of all, I would highly recommend, do not use pictures, especially of people, in your advertising. That's just my suggestion. I think you're asking for trouble when you do, because if you put, say, a picture of a couple for some reason, and say it's a white couple, then others are going to assume you're advertising marketing just for white couples, no other race. You don't want any other race there. Whether that be the case or not, that's what you're going to be accused of. So, I'm just, here HUD just saying you should use a variety of models from both minority and majority groups with different ages, and I think you'd be better off leave pictures of people out. I wouldn't, put a picture of the house you're selling and let it go. Be done with it. HUD also says it would be unlawful to suggest, and I got in quotes, a more suitable bottom floor to physically disabled persons, or to suggestively steer them to a, again in quotes, community better equipped for their condition. Again, at the end of the day, just because they're disabled does not mean they don't have the right to live anywhere they want to live. So for you to market or advertise, we've got suitable, what's the word I'm looking for? My mind just went blank. But anyway, we've got suitable housing on the bottom floor, which makes it easier to access, maybe for those that are disabled. You can't do stuff. You can't say things like that, because now you're suggesting they can't live on the second, third, or fourth floor. That's a no-no. So, look, you better be careful with one. Would not have pictures in any of your marketing and advertising of people, and I wouldn't have any verbiage in my marketing that would suggest who this would be good for, who it wouldn't be good for, why it would be good for somebody of this of situation or that's. You need to leave all that out. You're a real estate agent. Describe the real estate you're trying to sell or rent or whatever, and I would just leave everything else alone. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble, the way I see it. But HUD says you need to avoid discriminatory buzzwords such as, in quotes, ideal for young couples. Shouldn't be saying things like perfect for families. These words seem discriminatory towards older or single applicants. Using words like safe, limited, or exclusive might imply that you control who you're going to rent to. Again, I would say advertise and describe the real estate. Stay away from who you might think might be best suited here or whatever. I apologize. Putting up an ad for a community Christmas party or displaying images of Santa does not violate the act, but advertising for a, quote, Christian roommate within a community's common area does. So, you're not allowed to say, if you own the property, maybe you wanted to rent one of the rooms out to help offset some bills. You're not allowed to advertise for a Christian roommate. That is not my requirement at all, but that's HUD's. So just beware. But now we look at some of the exemptions that are available with the fair housing laws, and there are a few of them, so make sure you're familiar with who would be exempt. And when we say exempt, meaning there are some that could sell or rent property and be exempt and can discriminate even against some of the protected classes for a particular reason. and we're going to look at what those are. But what this limitation you see here, I would remember, it says we cannot use discriminatory advertising or involve a real estate agent. What they're saying is this. First of all, we're talking about for an owner-occupied dwelling. Say you got a single-family home, and say you've got a female that owns the home. She lives there by herself, but she decides she would like to rent out one of the rooms, again, to offset expenses and so forth. I think that's pretty common. A lot of people do that. And you can do what we're talking about here. If it's owner occupied and you have fewer than or 4 or fewer units, if you own more than 4 units, then that's considered multifamily, and this does not apply. But 4 or fewer units, and it is an owner occupied dwelling, then potentially you could discriminate. For example, again, if it's a single female, she might decide, well, I don't want to rent to a male. I don't want any guys living here with me, for probably good reason. Well, can she do that? Yes, she can discriminate against. Now, what protected class is she discriminating against? Sex. But because she owns the property and she's occupying the property, then she is exempt here and can discriminate. However, again, under that limitation, she cannot advertise in a discriminatory way, or nobody else for that matter. In other words, if she was going to put an advertisement somewhere trying to look for a roommate, she couldn't put on there looking for roommate, females only. You cannot advertise in a discriminatory manner. So she just have to advertise, seeking roommate. And then now if a guy does call interested in renting, then she could just tell him, you know what, I'm not going to be renting to males. I'm only going to be renting to females. So she can do that. She cannot advertise in a discriminatory manner. But the other thing is saying here, you cannot involve a real estate agent or a real estate licensee. Real estate agents are not exempt and cannot discriminate in any way, shape, or form. Okay. And even if you are the owner occupant looking to rent the room, if you happen to be a licensed real estate agent, then you're no longer exempt. Real estate agents cannot discriminate. Period. Okay. Here's talking about single family housing without a broker. Again, this applies if the owner owns 3 or fewer, so no more than 3 single family homes, sells or rents without broker involvement. So again, as long as you're not using a real estate agent, and assuming you are not a real estate agent, then you qualify for that exemption and could exempt or could discriminate in some cases. Religious organizations or private clubs, they have some exemptions as well. If it's a religious organization, it says they may restrict occupancy to members provided they do not discriminate based on race, color, or national origin. Some houses. Some churches will have like a parsonage, a house that's usually set aside for their preacher or pastor or whoever to live in. Well, occasionally the pastor might say, well, I already have a house. I don't need to live there and I don't want to move there. I'm going to stay in my house. Well, a lot of times the church may just rent the house out. Well, they may decide we're only going to rent the house to members of our church. Well, again, they're exempt, and they can require that anybody renting must be a member of the church. Same thing with private clubs. You see this a lot of times with golf courses. You may have to be a member of the club in order to own or live in the buildings in that neighborhood, in that golf course community. I'll get it out here in a second. So y'all, again, those are some of the religious and private clubs that are exempt. But then also senior housing exemptions, y'all, against familial status. Y'all, we've already talked about that a little bit, so I'm not going to beat it up. But y'all, if it's a property owned by HUD set aside for the elderly, or if it's a senior citizens community, whether it be a 62 years of age or older, or the other one that requires you must have at least one person that's 55 years of age or older in at least 80% of the properties or more, then they would qualify for senior citizens, and they would be exempt from the familial status, not any others, but just the familial status. Okay. We can always discriminate based on economic considerations. Obviously, what you're talking about there, if my rent's $1,500 a month, and you can't afford $1,500 a month, then I don't have to rent to you, regardless of what class you may belong to. If you can't afford to live here, I don't have to drop my rent because you can't afford it, right? And I will tell you, you better not have two different sets of rent depending on who's wanting to rent, right? You better have one amount that you rent for, and regardless of who it is, that's how much rent they pay. But economic considerations, that's another exemption. And then when it comes to state and federal law, state versus federal law, what we're talking about here, occasionally the law at the state level might be more restrictive than what the law requires at the federal level, or vice versa. Okay. What they're saying here is if the federal or state, if one or the other is more restrictive than the other, which one do you go with? Do you go with the federal law or the state law? You must go by whichever is the most restrictive law, whether it be state or federal. And then the last thing I just want to say here real quick, just to be clear, we were talking about all these exemptions to fair housing laws. There's one protected class that nobody can ever discriminate against for any reason. And hopefully you can guess it, know what that is. But in case you don't know, that's race. So even if you qualify for any of the exemptions we just talked about, race can never be exempt. You cannot discriminate based on race. The reason for it is because of that Supreme Court decision, Jones v. Mayer. Okay? Because of that Supreme Court decision, now nobody can ever discriminate based on race, even if you qualify for any of the exemptions we just talked about. Okay?